Grandmaster Ethan Vance sat in the profound silence of his Mad-Ion chamber, a space designed to amplify focus and quell external distractions. He was attempting to purge a lingering mental anomaly that had begun to subtly corrupt his inner peace. This was a routine purification for a mind as expansive as his, akin to clearing digital clutter from a vast network. Yet, as the turbulent psychic energy began to detach, an unforeseen transformation occurred. A dull thud echoed in the stillness, not unlike something heavy dropping. The expelled energy didn't dissipate. Instead, it rapidly condensed, coalescing into a human form. The shimmering light receded, revealing a formidable figure. He was clad in dark, form-fitting tactical gear, his physique impressively sculpted, an undeniable male presence radiating raw power. His face was a near-perfect mirror of Ethan's own, yet his eyes held a dangerous crimson gleam, and streaks of blood-red hair wove through his otherwise raven locks. A wild, untamed aura pulsed around him, tinged with an aggressive hunger that was distinctly unsettling. Ethan, the revered leader of the Lumina Order, froze. Before Ethan could voice a command, the manifestation moved. A strong, cold hand clamped around Ethan's neck, pressing him down onto the polished obsidian Mad-Ion plinth. Another hand, possessive and knowing, tilted his chin, forcing their gazes to lock. Ethan tried to marshal his etheric reserves, but he found his entire being locked down by the other's oppressive shadow energy, making escape impossible in that moment. He cursed his momentary lapse in judgment. This shadow entity was far from ordinary. Ethan had assumed it would behave like any typical psychic aberration, seeking to consume or replace him. He was wrong. The entity leaned in, its breath hot against Ethan's ear. It uttered words with a chilling intimacy, its canine teeth grazing the sensitive curve of his ear. He stated that Ethan smelled delectable and that he wanted to consume him. Ethan's internal alarms blared. He tried to focus his will to absorb this rogue fragment back into his core and reintegrate it. However, the entity merely continued its exploration, leaving a burning blush across Ethan's face. It then chuckled, a low, resonant sound. The entity claimed Ethan couldn't absorb him. Its lips brushed Ethan's skin as it whispered its intention to devour him instead. Ethan was enraged. He declared that he would rather perish than suffer such indignity. He desperately called upon his will-forged blade, a shimmering construct imbued with millennia of his concentrated psychic power. Its radiant energy flared, promising annihilation for this insolent anomaly. Yet, as Ethan watched, the entity merely cast a casual glance at the ether blade. The blade shuddered, emitting a mournful hum before disintegrating into glittering dust before Ethan's eyes. This entity was terrifyingly potent, far beyond anything he had anticipated. Ethan realized his profound miscalculation. This shadow self hadn't formed overnight. Subtle whispers had infiltrated his thoughts for months, declarations of affection and desire, dismissed as mere mental static. He had believed he'd suppressed it, contained it. Instead, it had merely grown stronger in the unseen depths of his psyche, culminating in this audacious physical manifestation. Though his primary weapon was gone, Ethan still had his mental arsenal. He raised a hand, and a heavy, obsidian broadsword, forged from condensed psychic force, materialized in his grasp. He pointed it at the entity, his aura resplendent with defiant power. The entity, however, merely leaned back with languid indifference, its dark attire shifting to reveal a finely muscled chest. While its face was its demeanor was starkly different. It was like a younger, more audacious version of himself, retaining a hint of his own reserved elegance but infused with a raw, almost predatory charm. It exuded the mischief of a playful rogue and the menace of a seasoned brawler. The entity let out a soft laugh. A wicked shadow cleaver, wreathed in dark energy, materialized beside its knee. It looked at Ethan with an unnerving intensity and suggested they settle their duel not in the chamber, but in a bed. Ethan seethed, reiterating his intention to eliminate it, not engage in its perverse fantasies. The entity tilted its head, its smile both innocent and utterly depraved. It asked how Ethan wished to be touched. Ethan felt a profound weariness he hadn't experienced in eons. He brandished his broadsword, sending waves of psychic force through the air. Yet, every one of his maneuvers seemed known to the entity, his etheric energy absorbed and redirected by its shadow counterpart. The entity was his shadow, his inversion, the embodiment of his hidden weaknesses and desires. With every strike, it seemed to gain strength. Within 100 exchanges, the entity found an opening, parrying Ethan's heavy blade and closing the distance with spectral speed. It twisted Ethan's arms behind his back, pinning him firmly. Their eyes met, noses almost touching. The entity intertwined their fingers, pressing their joined hands above Ethan's head. It declared that Ethan had lost the sword fight, but it had won the battle of lips, then silenced any potential protests with a predatory kiss. Their shared essence meant an astonishing physical compatibility. Each touch sent tremors directly through Ethan's very core, igniting sensations he had never acknowledged. Eons of ascetic discipline and mental clarity were crumbling, all his suppressed desires feeding this brazen manifestation. It was nothing short of a libertine entity. The entity finally broke the suffocating kiss, licking its lips, its eyes dark with an almost ravenous hunger. It then stated that playing with oneself was exhilarating. Ethan, being on the receiving end, vehemently disagreed. The entity's fingers traced Ethan's brow, then his nose, finally resting on his lips, gently caressing them. It declared that Ethan had spent millennia refining his spiritual discipline, all to cultivate such a perfect partner for it. Ethan raged internally. He had no desire to cultivate this rogue entity. He had to act. Most dominant beings, whether psychic or terrestrial, shared a common vulnerability. Seizing a moment, he gathered his remaining psychic energy in his knee and surged upward. The entity let out a muffled grunt, yet its face showed no surprise, only a sly grin. It had anticipated his move. With a swift movement of its long leg, it not only neutralized Ethan's attack but trapped his legs even more securely, pressing its entire weight down upon him. Ethan hissed a vow to destroy the monstrosity. The entity frowned slightly, then its expression softened into a playful, almost childlike plea. It told Ethan not to call it a monstrosity, but to call it baby, claiming it was barely a few minutes old. It leaned in again, its tongue tracing Ethan's. Ethan felt a wave of disgust and revulsion. How could he, a master of spiritual discipline, be so debased? How could he find himself so utterly repulsive? He struggled for calm, reminding himself of the Order's teachings. Embrace all aspects of self to achieve true enlightenment. Then, he looked down to see the entity's hand exploring beneath his robes, stroking his skin with a brazen familiarity. No, Ethan decided he could not accept this part of himself. He had to regain control, at least symbolically. He forced a composed, authoritative demeanor. He stated that even psychic entities needed proper names. The entity's eyes brightened. It declared that if Ethan was to be called Ethan, then it would be called Jax. It playfully demanded that Ethan call him. Ethan replied that his true name was Master Vance, his given name discarded eons ago. He wondered how the entity knew, then realized it was his own manifestation, privy to all his deepest secrets. Ethan, with a show of unwavering resolve, refused to utter such a preposterous name. The entity simply chuckled, seemingly unbothered. Its hand began to roam with increased audacity, knowing every sensitive point on Ethan's body better than Ethan himself. It suggested that if Ethan wouldn't use that name, other sounds would be just as pleasing. Ethan, a master of mental clarity for millennia, was completely outmaneuvered by this dark, hedonistic fragment of himself. A soft groan escaped his lips, a sound of profound humiliation, a testament to his surrender under its control. The sound was foreign, yet intoxicating, making him wish he could vanish into his own embrace. Jax held Ethan captive for nearly 2 weeks, a relentless battle waged on every conceivable level. The initiates of the Lumina Order believed their Grand Master was undergoing a deep, secluded attunement, seeking a profound breakthrough. They kept their distance, even the ethereal Etherhounds daring not to approach the Grand Hall, lest they disturb the Grand Master's spiritual journey. Their dutiful silence was almost unbearable. When Jax's manifestation reached its 20th day, the accumulated order business became too pressing, and a senior council member finally sought an audience. Ethan, held snugly in Jax's embrace, sat upon the Grand Master's high, ornate chair, his psychic channels sealed, his energy constrained. He was little more than a living doll. A dark, shimmering veil had been draped, obscuring the precise scene on the elevated platform. It was an unbearable humiliation, yet it was also a desperate chance for rescue. While no single member of the Order could match him in power, a combined assault by the Council and elite initiates might overwhelm Jax, who was still relatively newly formed. The first to enter was Councilman Thorne, renowned for his keen intellect and sharp perception. Ethan's heart surged with hope. Councilman Thorne bowed low, his gaze piercing the shadowy veil, fixing on the indistinct, overlapping forms. He inquired what Ethan was holding. Ethan's core tightened. He was about to try and unblock a minor energy point, hoping to make some discernible movement, when Jax's hand tightened on his waist. A jolt of electric sensation shot through him, nearly eliciting a gasp. Immediately afterward, Jax's voice, a perfect imitation of Ethan's own, cool and languid, replied. He stated that he was simply holding himself. Councilman Thorne blinked, then, to Ethan's utter dismay, stroked his beard, a look of profound satisfaction spreading across his face, like a seasoned farmer admiring a thriving crop. He nodded sagely. He remarked that Ethan seemed to have gained some weight, that his complexion was robust, and deemed it excellent news. Ethan felt a surge of psychic blood choke in his throat. Yes, he was heavier. He was twice the size of his original self. Was the councilman blind? Councilman Thorne, oblivious to Ethan's silent fury, proceeded with his report. He informed Ethan that 3 days prior, a new apprentice, Finn, had accidentally killed the 4th councilman's etherhound and had subsequently fled. He asked how Ethan wished to proceed. Ethan recalled Finn, a promising young psychic with remarkable potential. The 4th councilman's etherhound was notoriously arrogant, often harassing junior initiates. Finn's actions likely had a just cause. Ethan's usual approach would be to retrieve Finn, assess the situation, and offer guidance before punishment. However, as a flicker of empathy for Finn crossed Ethan's thoughts, Jax immediately sensed it. Being Ethan's shadow self, his emotional fluctuations were completely transparent. A wave of possessive, acidic shadow energy almost became palpable. Then, Jax spoke, his voice chillingly detached, delivering a stark command. Track him. Eliminate him. Ethan felt a wave of internal nausea. Finn, if you meet your end, know that it was not by my true hand, but by the unreasonable jealousy of my other self. Councilman Thorne seemed momentarily startled but quickly bowed in compliance, then departed with a brisk stride, as if merely attending to a trivial matter. Ethan's hope withered significantly. Next, Head Investigator Davis, known for his relentless pursuit of dark practitioners, entered. Ethan's hope flickered back to life. Davis was exceptionally sensitive to shadow energy. He would surely detect Jax's presence. Head Investigator Davis sniffed the air, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stated that Ethan smelled unusual. This was it. He knew. Find this entity, Ethan urged internally. Jax let out a soft, innocent chuckle. He asked if Ethan liked the scent, claiming he was wearing Ethan's own special blend. Head Investigator Davis, usually stern and rigid, actually showed a flicker of understanding, even nodding. He affirmed that it was indeed good, adding that the Grand Master should pay more attention to his personal presentation. Ethan slumped in despair, burying his face into Jax's chest, futilely attempting to bite him. His sealed psychic points rendered him powerless, making the gesture seem more like a nuzzle than an attack. This pleased Jax, who laughed softly and lowered his head, expertly capturing Ethan's lips. Ethan, furious, clamped his teeth down. Jax let out a muffled grunt. An accompanying junior investigator behind Davis looked up, confused, asking about the noise. Jax, completely unperturbed, even with his tongue still in Ethan's mouth, mumbled that he had just bitten his own tongue. Head investigator Davis found no fault in this and continued his report. He informed Ethan that the patrol had apprehended a dark cultist attempting to infiltrate the Order's grounds and sought instructions on his fate. Ethan's thoughts stirred again. He typically advocated for rehabilitation or using captured cultists for labor or as leverage with other dark factions to benefit the Order. Jax himself was a manifestation of dark energy. Surely, he would show some empathy for his kind. Ethan even harbored a slight concern that Jax might show leniency and release the cultist. Instead, Jax's cold voice issued a two-word command: bury him alive. Head investigator Davis's eyes immediately gleamed with fierce satisfaction. His voice gained a new resonance as he declared his obedience to the Grand Master's orders. This judgment perfectly aligned with Davis's long-held animosity towards dark practitioners. Watching Davis depart with a spring in his step, Ethan felt utterly numb. Every single person who came for a ruling left seemingly delighted. Through the window, Ethan faintly heard their pleased chatter. They remarked that the Grand Master had shown decisive authority today, that he had truly changed, and that they admired his swift judgment against traitors and cultists. Ethan internally lamented. A pack of disloyal fools. Did no one question if their Grand Master had been replaced? If he was being coerced? "I care about you, Ethan," Jax whispered, nuzzling Ethan's cheek with his own identical handsome face, his tone sickly sweet. Ethan's internal alarm screamed. Jax was his shadow self. He could hear Ethan's innermost thoughts. Yes, Jax chuckled, like a cat toying with its prey. His fingers began to explore, precisely finding several hidden sensitive points on Ethan's body, gently tracing them. "Every single one of your thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations belongs to me." Ethan resigned himself to the situation. He had to save himself. He took a deep breath, forcing a twisted smile, softening his voice. He suggested to Jax that they try something different today, perhaps a session in the hydrotherapy chambers. Jax's crimson eyes narrowed, assessing him. He asked if Ethan was playing a trick. "Yes, I am," Ethan thought, but cleared his mind, maintaining his forced smile. He told Jax that he was overthinking things, that Ethan was merely trying to please him. Jax stared at him for a few seconds, then his face broke into a dazzling smile, like ice melting in the sun. He claimed he couldn't resist Ethan because he adored him. He swept Ethan into his arms. In a blur, they were in the Order's hydrotherapy chamber, located behind the main hall. The air was thick with warm mist, infused with soothing etheric energies. Jax gently placed Ethan on the smooth, polished jade edge of the pool. Then he raised his hands, looking at Ethan with an innocent, watery gaze. Ethan felt a shiver of dread at the strange expression. Jax blinked, then stated with complete seriousness that as a newly manifested entity, barely a month old, he didn't know how to undress himself. Ethan suspected Jax wanted to torment him to death, then casually assume his identity and body. But to achieve his secret goal, Ethan endured. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly, to unfasten the intricate clasps of Jax's dark tactical suit. "Gentler, Ethan," Jax purred, then directed him slightly higher, claiming it tickled. "A little firmer there. I love it when you're rough with me." Ethan was only unfastening a simple jacket, yet Jax sounded as if he were experiencing transcendent ecstasy. Ethan's legs felt weak, not from desire, but from utter repulsion. Was this truly a part of him? Was there such a depraved aspect hidden deep within his own psyche? He refused to believe it. Ethan's true reason for suggesting the hydrotherapy chamber was a powerful psychic containment grid hidden beneath its waters, a defense he had installed years ago for emergencies. As Jax seemed lost in the pleasure of being served, his eyes hazy as he reached to caress Ethan's ankle, Ethan abruptly lunged forward. His fingertips pressed precisely onto a specific point on the jade. A low hum resonated, and golden runes erupted from the pool's depths, swiftly encircling Ethan, forming an impenetrable cocoon of light. He had succeeded. Standing within the luminous shell, Ethan couldn't help but let out a triumphant laugh. He declared to Jax that he had escaped, asking what the entity could possibly do now. Jax, outside the golden cocoon, showed no hint of alarm. He merely smiled, his fingers tracing the outline of Ethan's body through the shimmering light. He asked if Ethan was certain that this counted as an escape. Ethan looked down, following Jax's gaze. He was naked, his body covered in faint red marks from their recent struggles, water droplets clinging to his skin. It was an utterly scandalous sight, one he himself couldn't bear to behold. In an instant, Jax acted. He extended 2 fingers like blades, dark shadow energy spiraling around them, and sliced through the containment grid. With a sharp crack, the golden cocoon shattered, dissolving into scattered motes of light. Ethan was once again within Jax's grasp. Jax pulled him into a tight embrace, the warm hydrotherapy water enveloping them anew. He kissed Ethan, his tongue expertly parting Ethan's lips. The sensation of 2 almost identical tongues intertwined was profoundly unsettling, yet held a perverse, illicit thrill. And Ethan, to his horror, found himself responding. He was perhaps equally depraved. He was actually stirred by an entity barely 100 days old, using his own body to unravel his composure. Jax seemed to sense his change, deepening the kiss, becoming more audacious. Ethan felt a throbbing ache in his head, his back, his entire being. Jax's manifestation had crippled his original powers. He had tried countless escape methods, all of which only seemed to intensify Jax's perverse games. Having a shadow self was not uncommon for a psychic. Mastering it was part of the journey. But a shadow self that became a physical, sentient being, and worse, loved him, was a terrifying novelty. Ethan had once seriously asked Jax why he harbored such feelings. The entity, with an uncanny, untaught flirtatiousness, embraced Ethan from behind, resting his chin on Ethan's shoulder. He declared that the heights of solitude were cold, that no one loved Ethan, so he had created himself to do so. Ethan's mental fortitude almost fractured at the words. He rewarded Jax with a sharp psychic kick. It of course missed. Jax deftly caught his ankle, then proceeded to give him a foot massage for several minutes, claiming it was to stimulate his energy channels. Despite his futile resistance, Ethan refused to remain passive. He began to mate daily, ostensibly for self-cultivation, but secretly attempting to birth another psychic manifestation. Yes, if one Jax was too much to handle, he would simply create another. He even had a name picked out, Serene. His requirements were simple: calm, detached, free of desire, and capable of keeping Jax, this insufferable entity, in check. Jax seemed oblivious to these attempts. He had fully taken over Ethan's role, managing the Lumina Order with remarkable efficiency, even earning widespread praise. How times had changed. This ruthlessly effective, take-no-prisoners approach surprisingly proved more popular than Ethan's own gentle, balanced leadership. However, reality often fell short of aspiration. One day, as Ethan diligently worked on manifesting Serene, Jax, having finished his order duties, quietly crawled over. He poked Ethan's abdomen with a finger. He asked if Ethan was pregnant. Ethan's mind reeled, though he outwardly remained calm. Damn it! He actually detected it. His second manifestation plan had barely begun. Jax, ever the meddler, proceeded to vex Ethan in various ways, claiming it was to foster family harmony and prevent resource division. the specifics were best left unsaid. In short, through Jax's relentless efforts, Ethan's nascent serene manifestation suffered a psychic miscarriage. Fallen before it even began, a tragic fate. In the blink of an eye, Jax's 100-day mark arrived. Ethan, he cooed, tilting his head with a cheeky grin. Ethan barely lifted an eyelid. Jax announced that it was his 100th day. Ethan congratulated him with sarcastic indifference. Jax then demanded a gift. Ethan entered full Grand Masturbation mode, pretending to be a statue. Jax didn't mind. He chuckled, then, as if performing a magic trick, produced a small, braided leather cord, fashioned like a whip. He brandished the fuzzy object, his eyes unervingly bright. He stated that Ethan would enjoy it, and so would he. Only he would truly know me. Ethan, to his utter shame, felt a stirring of illicit desire. Millennia of spiritual discipline and ascetic living had concealed this peculiar, utterly private fetish. This shadow entity truly understood him inside and out. The ensuing moments were best left to the imagination. Suffice it to say, Jax proved an exceptional role player, his exaggerated cries and vibrant expressions making him seem like the one being, dominated. Indeed, in a strange way, it could be called a delightful wrestling match with oneself. Soon, real trouble emerged. The runaway apprentice, Finn, hadn't been recaptured. Instead, he had allied himself with the Umbra Syndicate, a dark faction. The deranged youth betrayed the Lumina Order's defenses, leading the Syndicate's forces in a full-scale assault. Ethan frantically urged Jax to let him go. As Grand Master, his order was in peril. He couldn't remain confined. Jax, however, pinned him down. "I'll handle the battle," he declared. As he spoke, all traces of his former mischief vanished. Clad in dark armor, his shadow cleaver in hand, dark energy and ethereal light strangely entwined around him, he radiated an authoritative power that was surprisingly convincing. Watching him depart, a bizarre sense of paternal pride swelled in Ethan's chest. Nonsense. He must have been driven mad by the stress. While Jax fought valiantly outside, Ethan waited anxiously in the chamber. Yet, as time stretched on, a growing unease settled over him. The sounds of battle outside, far from diminishing, grew closer. Suddenly, with a deafening crash, the chamber wall exploded inward, a torrent of dark energy flooding the room. Ethan turned, locking eyes with his ancient rival, Lord Damien Kale, leader of the Umbra Syndicate. Kale's rugged face registered an astonishment equal to Ethan's. He stammered, asking if Ethan wasn't outside leading the defense. Kale then peered out, narrowed his eyes, and scrutinized Ethan, still bound to the obsidian plinth by specialized restraints. He finally understood. He declared that it was Ethan's shadow self. Kale's gaze flickered between Ethan and his restraints, his facial muscles twitching, fighting a grin. "Just laugh," Ethan thought, his expression blank, utterly resigned. Yes, he, the Grand Master, after a lifetime of triumphs, had finally been undone by himself. Kale erupted in a booming laugh that threatened to bring down the remaining ceiling. Once he'd caught his breath, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes, he approached Ethan, rattling the restraints on his ankle. His tone grew menacing. He stated that since Ethan had fallen into his hands, he intended to thoroughly humiliate him. Ethan remained impassive, asking how Kale intended to humiliate him. Kale stroked his chin, his eyes roving over Ethan's form. He then declared with grim satisfaction that he would marry him. A flash of insight, not anger or shame, but sheer brilliance, ignited in Ethan's mind. He was saved, not because he had suddenly developed feelings for the hulking Dark Lord, but because he had conceived a magnificent, two birds with one stone scheme. If he married Kale, Jax, that possessive entity, would never tolerate it. He would surely come crashing the wedding. With Jax's power, eliminating Kale would be trivial. Perfect. He could use Jax to destroy his old enemy, and then watch them both suffer, ideally weakening Jax in the process. Ethan immediately agreed. He told Kale to take him away. Kale's expression became profoundly subtle. He fell silent for a long moment, unnerved by Ethan's swift compliance, as if questioning his own sanity. Finally, as if convincing himself, he stiffened his neck. He grumbled that Ethan was still quite handsome, and that Kale wasn't losing anything. Ethan inwardly smirked. There would be a cost, Kale. And soon you wouldn't even be able to count the losses because you would be dead. Kale urged him to come. Ethan instinctively and elegantly raised his bound hands. Kale stared at him. He asked what Ethan was doing. Damn it! Accustomed to being carried by Jax due to his sealed psychic channels, Ethan had momentarily forgotten that despite his limited power, he could still walk. His grand rescue plan already seemed tainted with an aura of foolishness. Ethan found himself in Lord Kale's formidable fortress. Kale declared their wedding would be in a month, telling Ethan to rest well, then vanished. Ethan heard gossip from the attending cultists that Kale was undergoing cosmetic enhancements, believing his current appearance unsuitable for Ethan's refined demeanor and aiming to surprise him. Ethan tried to feel anticipatory. This month was the first genuine peace he'd had since Jax appeared, yet he found himself missing Jax. Not out of affection, but rather isolated in the heart of a hostile dark faction. He instinctively craved a protector. And Jax, despite being a chaotic entity, was at least his own entity and undeniably powerful. Ethan attempted to connect with him telepathically. Initially, he maintained his dignified posture, sending a message that he was in distress and required immediate assistance. No response. He gritted his teeth, softened his tone. He implored Jax, his baby, to come save him. Still, the telepathic link remained silent. Ethan gave up all pretense. He mimicked Jax's usual flirtatious, saccharine tone, affecting a pleading whine. He claimed he was scared, that it was dark here, Kale was ugly, and wanted to hurt him. Still nothing. Fine, Jax. So much for loyalty. Ethan thought, discarding me the moment you're free? I, who rarely stoop to such vulnerability, and you dare ignore me. Perhaps his performance wasn't convincing enough, not sufficiently depraved. With this mix of frustration and anxiety, the days dragged by until the wedding day. The dark fortress was draped in garish crimson, a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. Ethan sat on a skull-carved throne, dressed in a ceremonial dark robe, his heart cold. Jax still hadn't appeared. More disturbingly, he overheard two cultists whispering in a corner. They spoke of the Lumina Order's shadow self, the one who looked just like their new bride, being dead. They debated how he died, with one claiming he died laughing, driven mad. Jax was dead? A sharp pang struck Ethan's heart. He instinctively scanned his psychic connection to Jax. It was still there, incredibly faint, but not severed. He wasn't dead, but he had unilaterally blocked their telepathic communication. Why? A thought surfaced. Had his departure freed Jax, allowing him to explore the world, encounter other captivating beings, and find his ancient, staid, original, utterly boring, leading him to abandon Ethan? Humph. Ethan told himself he didn't care. A rogue, insubordinate, lewd shadow self was just an inconvenience. His absence meant peace. He would simply find a way to permanently reabsorb him later. Just as his internal struggle of bitterness and anger reached its peak, a syrupy voice announced Kale's arrival. "My beauty, I have come." Kale pulled aside the heavy curtain, revealing his improved face, a grotesque blend of bull and lizard. Ethan instinctively recoiled. Kale lunged forward, his massive hands reaching, urging Ethan to relax, promising to love him well. Ethan's legs trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. He could almost smell Jax's approach. Faster, faster, he urged silently. Jax's voice, imbued with a dangerous excitement, resonated in Ethan's mind. He promised Ethan not to rush, but to wait until he dealt with this unsightly creature, after which he would truly torment Ethan, making him cry and beg never to leave him again. Ahem. It seemed Jax had fully understood his distress signal. Ethan quickly silenced his own thoughts, saving his energy, lest he truly be unable to cry out when Jax arrived. Wait a moment, Ethan thought, is my mental state a bit off? Why does this feel so natural? He reassured himself. Talking to himself affectionately was simply self-comfort. Normal. The ceremony reached the potion exchange. Kale held 2 goblets filled with a glowing green concoction, a special brew from the dark realms, approaching Ethan with a possessive gaze. Just then, with a thunderous roar, the palace dome was violently ripped open by a surge of overwhelming shadow energy. Amidst the showering debris, a dark figure descended like a falling star, his shadow cleaver in hand, robes fluttering. It was Jax. His hair flew wildly, his crimson eyes burned with bloodlust, and surging shadow energy enveloped him, making him appear more like a true Dark Lord than any being in the fortress. Kale, stunned by the sudden chaos, roared in fury. He demanded to know who dared interrupt his wedding. Jax's lips curled into a wicked smirk. He shook his shadow cleaver, and a wave of dark energy swept through the surrounding cultists, scattering them. He proclaimed himself Jax, and that he slew for one. Ethan inwardly winced at the dramatic flourish. But then he remembered Jax was barely half a year old. A touch of youthful bravado and melodrama was perhaps understandable. And actually, he looks rather handsome in this imposing stance. A moment of self-correction. How could he find a murderous, hedonistic shadow self handsome? Then again, praising himself wasn't inherently wrong. He was truly lost. He had completely, undeniably, fallen for this shadow self. My beauty, wait for me. I shall dispatch this madman. Kale bellowed, grabbing his spiked club and charging forward. Ethan nodded calmly. Moments later, Kale's agonizing screams echoed from outside. Then, Jax strode into the inner chamber, stepping over scattered bodies, and tossed Finn's head at Ethan's feet. Ethan didn't even glance at the traitor's head. He gave Jax a radiant smile. Ah, his hero, his rescuer, deserved a pleasant face. Jax opened his arms, pulling Ethan into a tight embrace, resting his chin on Ethan's head. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his fingers gently tracing Ethan's slightly moist eyelids. Ethan thought to himself that he couldn't possibly be afraid. He had weathered countless storms. Then, half carried by Jax, he emerged from the ruined main chamber of the fortress. What he saw was a nightmare. Bodies strewn everywhere, rivers of blood, dark energy and death intermingling like a true hellscape. Ethan was afraid now, not of the scene itself, but of the entity beside him. He feared he would never escape Jax's grasp. Jax brought him directly back to the Lumina Order's Grand Hall. It too was now decorated in vibrant crimson, festive and joyful. What was this? Ethan felt a surge of confusion. Jax wrapped an arm around Ethan's waist, whispering in his ear that it was for their wedding, and that he would be gentle. Wait, wasn't this too fast? Before Ethan could protest, Jax initiated a series of powerful psychic and spiritual bonds. A soul contract, a life-sharing pact, an energy resonance agreement, and even a sensual empathy pact. In essence, they were bound inside and out, soul and body, completely and irrevocably. Jax, a true conqueror, born barely half a year ago, had subdued the Grand Master, eliminated a formidable Dark Lord, and ascended to his own dark zenith. If not for the subsequent cosmic event, his story would have been one of unbroken triumph. Indeed, on the second day of their wedding, without towering storm clouds gathered in the heavens, a formidable bolt of purple-gold lightning, imbued with divine judgment, struck Jax with pinpoint accuracy. He didn't even have time for a final witty remark before he disintegrated into a wisp of ash before Ethan's eyes. Ethan stood frozen for a long moment before abruptly realizing something. Counting back, today marked 6 months since Jax's manifestation. A shadow self, being an unnatural entity, was destined to face celestial retribution once it reached a certain stage of growth. This was his 6-month trial, and he had failed to overcome it. Ethan Vance, Grand Master of the Lumina Order, was a widower on the 2nd day of his wedding. He stared at the still warm pile of ash on the bed, speechless, a myriad of emotions swirling within him. But most prominent was a profound, aching emptiness. He assumed Jax was truly gone. Fine, a widower then. Ethan resolved to channel his grief into power, diving into a 3-century-long mad ion to forget this troublesome entity. Yet, as he carefully collected the small pile of ash, intending to inter it in a sacred place, a faint whisper echoed in his mind. Wait for me. He wasn't dead. Ethan, clutching the ashes, felt an uncontrollable, mad grin spread across his face. All right, he indulged him. He would wait. Time in the secluded mountains of spiritual practice was often immeasurable, but now, burdened by this longing, the days took on a new, restless quality. He no longer possessed his former mative calm, constantly checking the psychic link, sensing for any sign of his return. Fortunately, Jax did not make him wait too long. One day, as Ethan gazed at the remnant ash, a familiar, powerful surge of shadow energy ripped through the void. The next second, he was enveloped in a searing embrace. Ethan, Jax murmured into his neck, his voice thick with yearning. I missed you so much. Ethan's eyes welled slightly, but his voice, out of habit, remained dismissive. He huffed that Jax was now 3 years old and needed to act more maturely to stop constantly clinging. Jax lifted his head, deep desire swirling in his crimson eyes, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. He declared that his love, however, was very mature indeed. Before he finished speaking, Ethan felt a torrent of the psychic contracts surge through his entire being. Damn him! He was radiating pure, unadulterated lust. Ethan's legs buckled, and Jax effortlessly pressed him onto the divan. He had indeed grown.